Welcome to the biggest influences. This is the real Joe Rogan.
So this was Aldous Huxley had written The Doors of Perception and was talking about mescaline and spiritual experiences. And a lot of people who were doing work with LSD, with alcoholics and others in the 50s would have these spiritual experiences. Bill W., who started Alcoholics Anonymous, actually had an LSD experience in the 50s. And his first place getting sober was Belladonna. So Bill W., the founder of AA, had a psychedelic experience that got him sober in the first place.
Yeah.
And then later, about a decade or more later, he experimented with LSD. And he felt that this LSD could be tremendous for...
Well, what was his initial psychedelic experience that led him to get sober?
Well, it was belladonna.
What is belladonna?
It's kind of, when you think about what drugs did the witches use in the Middle Ages, it's a disorienting psychedelic. I think it's scopolamine.
Oh, that stuff is crazy. That's that devil's dust shit.
Yes, exactly. And
that's the stuff that's supposed to turn people essentially into zombies that are like very easy to suggest.
Yeah, Wade Davis has done studies about the voodoo cults in Haiti.
Yeah,
and what drugs they use, and they kind of can tranquilize people. They bury them alive. They think that
they blow dust in their nose. Yeah. Scopolamine is also the stuff they use to stop people from getting motion sickness on boats, which is really crazy, like Dramamine patches.
Well, that illustrates the exact point, though, that it's not the thing itself, it's how it's used. It's the relationship you have with it, it's the dose, it's the route of administration, it's how you do it. So
he had scopolamine helped him get off of alcohol.
Yeah, you have this terrifying experience. Things come to the surface, but and it did help him. And then when he did LSD in the 50s, and I met one of the women that gave him the LSD, Sidney Cohn, was the man, and what he felt was that we talk about in AA about hitting bottom. Mm-hmm. You know, that people's lives, when they hit bottom, then they're finally ready to make a change. But that means that they've destroyed their families. They've destroyed their jobs, their health. And so what Bill W. felt is that you could give LSD to people and they could psychologically hit bottom.
Yes.
While they still had some intact relationships that would then help support them as they tried to move to sobriety. And he felt that this could have a major role to play in AA, but
why didn't he ever incorporate it?
It became too controversial, and so he ended up
working with cruder tools.
But there was a lot of work with LSD in the 60s for alcohol use disorder, and it proved to be quite effective when supported. So that these substances can be extremely helpful, again, used in a careful way. So the Good Friday experiment was an attempt to understand, can psychedelics produce a mystical experience? And Walter Pankey was a doctor and a minister, and he was getting a PhD at Harvard. And he was interested in looking at the spiritual potential of MDMA, and of psilocybin, and he worked with Timothy Leary, and they did this experiment, and they did it with a Reverend Howard Thurman. So Howard Thurman was an African-American minister at Boston University's Marsh Chapel, and Howard Thurman is someone who deserves a lot more attention because he studied with Gandhi. He studied nonviolence with Gandhi, and then he became Martin Luther King's mentor. And Martin Luther King got a PhD at Boston University, and Howard Thurman was his mentor. So Howard Thurman really helped the American civil rights movement adopt the strategy of nonviolence that he got from Gandhi, and that's what we see, in all of the stories about people being beaten by police trying to protest different things, and they try to react. So nonviolent resistance was a key to the American civil rights movement. And Howard Thurman was very interested in this connection between the mystical experience and political action. So the mystical experience, you move beyond your sense of, I'm, this biographical person, I'm my tribe, I'm my country, I'm my religion, that there's something deeper, that we're a part of humanity. We're part of energy. I mean, if you look at the quantum level, right, we're all energy. We're all connected in these different ways. So when you feel that, And Rita Marley has this incredible album, Bob Marley's wife, and it's called Who Feels It Knows It. Who feels it knows it. So you can say this, and I can say this, and people could hear it, but if you have an experience that you feel it, then you know it. And so Howard Thurman was very interested in this idea of what are the political implications of this mystical experience. And so Walter Pahnke was willing to work with him. And Howard Thurman said, I will let you come to my church, Marsh Chapel, on Good Friday, and you can do an experiment with 20 divinity students from Andover Newton Theological Seminary, and you can give them all a pill. And half will be psilocybin, half will be placebo, which was nicotinic acid, which gives you a flush. And so this was done, and it was considered to be the most eloquently designed experiment ever done on whether psychedelics could produce a mystical experience. And it showed that 9 out of the 20 people had a mystical experience, 8 out of the 9 had the psilocybin, and then they did some long-term, like 6-month follow-ups, and they said it impacted their lives in certain ways. And then Walter Pahnke died in a terrible scuba diving accident in 1971. And so a lot was ended with him. And then the 1970 and the backlash against psychedelics. So now it's in the 80s, and I'm undergraduate. I dropped out of college for 10 years from 1972 to 1982. And you have to do a thesis, a senior thesis at New College. And I wanted to do psychedelic research, but psychedelic research was wiped out at the time, nothing to do. You couldn't get permission to give psychedelics. But I thought, if I go back to the Good Friday experiment, that I could do a long-term follow-up that is just asking people what happened to them when they took the psilocybin and how do they think about it now. And I wouldn't have to get permission from the FDA or the DEA. I would just have to get permission from what's called an institutional review board, which our college had, just about the safety of the subject. But I'm just asking them questions. Mm-hmm. So that was the only way that I could do psychedelic research. And it was incredible because in the mystical literature, the real test of the validity of a mystical spiritual experience is called the fruits test. Means, what are the consequences in your life? What are the fruits of the experience? Does it make you more peaceful, more loving? Does it make you more, reduce your fear of death? Does it give you a more spiritual sense of how we're connected? So that's the fruits test. And so because people can describe all sorts of things, but what impact does it have in your life? So I figured I can do a long-term follow-up, and that's the fruits test. And Walter Pahnke would have done it if he hadn't died. But nobody else was doing it. So I ended up trying to figure out how to do it. I went to Andover Newton School, and I said, nobody knew who the subjects were in the study. So I went to this school, and I went to, which is outside of Boston, and I said, I'd like to put a note in the alumni newsletter. Would you be willing to do that? And they said no. They refused. I said, this is the most important experiment ever in the history of mystical experiences and psychedelics with your students. And I just want to ask them questions. Would you let me put something in the alumni newsletter? And they said no. This is now 1986. And so I was like, oh, God, I was blocked. Tim Leary, nobody had the list. So I went to their library, and I thought maybe I'll see some books or something on this experiment. Nothing. The thesis that was done at Harvard, nothing. They had zero about this experiment. It's like cultural amnesia. But I'm wandering through the library, and I noticed that they've got some books of the alumni. And one of them had the list of all the students that were in school in 1962 and their names and their addresses. I was like, wow, this is bonanza. So I photocopied it all, and then there was like 350 of them, and I wrote a postcard to every single one of them. And that led me to 3 of them wrote back saying that they were in the study. And over years and years, it took me, but I identified 19 out of the 20. And I was able to go see them in person and interview them. And this really validated my theory of change. So my theory of change also, which you've shared a bit, is that if you have these spiritual connections, these spiritual experiences, that will make you think about the world in a different way, think about others in a different way.
Yeah.
And so what people said is that their mystical experiences really did reduce their fear of death, made them feel more connected to other people who were from different faiths, made them more ecumenical in a way, deepened their faith in their own religion. It didn't turn them away, but they saw it in a more symbolic rather than literal way. But what I discovered, so it validated the results. But what I discovered is a big mistake, that one of the persons in the study had heard Howard Thurman, by the way, the audio of that service is up on our website. If you go Good Friday Experiment, you can listen to Howard Thurman's Good Friday Experiment speech, his sermons and stuff from 1962. One of them was, you have to tell people there's a man on the cross. You must tell people there's a man on the cross. And one of the students, under the influence of psilocybin, said, yeah, I got to tell people there's a man on the cross. I'm going to do it right now, and I'm going to run out of this room, and I'm going to run down the road, and I should tell the president. But the president is in D.C., so I'll tell the president of the university. And he goes running down the street, and Walter Pankey and Houston Smith go, running after him. It's a busy street on Commonwealth Ave in front of the Mars Chapel. And they finally catch him, and he doesn't want to go inside. He's outside. He's tripping. He's got this mission. And they give him a shot of Thorazine to tranquilize him, to bring him back inside. And they never mentioned that at all.
Wow.
Completely not mentioned it. So I had this decision when I'm going to write this follow-up study. I said, I can't hide that. So I did report that. And what was going on, I think, was in the culture was this exaggeration of the risks and suppression and minimization of the benefits. And I think what Timothy Leary did in response was the opposite.
Yes.
He's like, okay, I can exaggerate the benefits. One dose, you're enlightened, you know more than everybody else. And then he would minimize the risks.
Yeah, that's not good.
It's terrible.
You can't do that. I think I had, I don't know if you ever saw the podcast, I had Alex Berenson on, who wrote a book called Tell Your Children, and it's all about the dangers of marijuana. And I had him on with Dr. Mike Hart, who is a cannabis doctor in Canada. And, one of the things that he was talking about was people, for whatever reason, when they have a high dose of marijuana, there's something that happens to some of them where they have a schizophrenic break. And I have heard of it. I know people who have had this. And the pro-marijuana people do not want to acknowledge this danger. They want to paint marijuana as a completely innocuous substance that no one should worry about. And I think it's way too powerful for that. And I think too many people are psychologically or physiologically vulnerable. We're not all the same. And if someone is particularly vulnerable, whether it's towards schizophrenia or whatever mental illness it might be, there's something about these experiences that seem to send them over the edge. And that's something that we should be concerned with. We should talk about it.
We have to, because if we become what we the opposite of what we are worried about, or actually we don't become the opposite, we become like them. We just do the same. So I think
it's the same thing. It's like we become the polar opposite. We just justify things that we find morally reprehensible, we find ethically terrible, and we justify it because we're doing it for the right side.
Subscribe to Biggest Influences today.